Hey, Bulls and Bears, what is up? It is March 9th, Wednesday, 2022. Well, what is up? I will answer that question for you. The cost of owning property is up. The cost of renting property is up. The cost of buying food is up. The cost of energy, fuel, cost of living in general is up. The cost of raw materials and construction materials for building homes is up. The cost of labor is going to be up. If you try to run a business, you're going to be pressured to pay higher wages. So hopefully wages will go up, but wages will never keep up with the true rising costs. That's why these calls for higher minimum wage is not the solution. It may be a temporary fix. It may be a Band-Aid on a broken leg, but it's not a long-term solution. So let's talk about evictions today. Just as we told you, institutional investors, big money landlords have now ramped up their evictions. And we've got some stories here to talk about. And we're going to talk about the long-term trend here and the trajectory for home ownership and these big institutional, big money investors. This first story comes out of Ohio. Large investor landlords buy Cleveland properties, raise rent, evict tenants who cannot pay the increase. All right, and this one here is out of Cleveland 19. Quote from this article: investors are insatiable with their demand for more and more houses. We're seeing more of a concentration of poverty as tenants are forced to find substandard housing. So what we're seeing here, folks, is big money going into poverty-stricken areas and buying buildings full of apartments, also single-family homes. But a trend that's been increasing more and more now is the multifamily complexes. The units are being bought up by these investors, and they know that the people living there are going to be less likely or less able to go out and buy a home. So they're just raising the rents on these people, especially in poorer areas. For example, in Atlanta, Georgia, just at the end of last year, over 40% of home sales were sales to investors. Over 40%. In some other areas, it's closer to 50%. Also, in Atlanta, and this is just one example, but in Atlanta, 76% of the eviction filings were filed by investors. And we're not talking about the mom and pop investor that just owns a couple properties. These are large investors that own 20 or more properties. All right, we told you that this was going to happen, and it's going to continue to get worse. Right now, there's no restrictions. There's no rules that mega institutions, mega investors, multinational companies in some cases can come in and buy unlimited amounts of homes. There's no limit. There's no ceiling on this, okay? So it's going to get a lot worse. All right, these are companies that can go in and borrow money for nearly zero and then turn around and buy swaths of real estate and then increase the rents on all of the tenants, and the tenants have no rights. Now, tenants are trying to get past this. They're trying to pass laws or pass rules that say they can't be evicted. Of course, we saw what happened starting in 2020 with that whole situation. But let's take a look at what's happening down in Miami. Tenants demand rights amid rent hikes, surging evictions. Miami-Dade. Tenants demand rights. Well, think about that just for a minute. All right, and I feel bad for these people, but do you have the right to live somewhere if you can't afford it? If the answer is no, then where does it end? How many investors should be allowed to come in and buy properties and just raise the rent to who knows how high, infinity? There's no laws, there's no rules. I'm not saying there should be laws. I'm just saying this is a big mess. And what's the root of the problem here? Please let me know down in comments. I think the root of the problem is the endless amount of money that can be created out of thin air, allowing these big hedge funds, institutional investors to borrow this amount of money and then go out and buy these levels, these numbers of properties. Now, of course, there are some investors, some companies that are seeing higher overhead. Actually, a lot of them are seeing higher overhead, and that is one of the reasons why one of their justifications for raising the rent But we know a big part of this is greed and monopoly power. Right, and it's not just in the United States. This is worldwide. Let's take a look at what's happening in some other parts of the world right now. And this story is out of big issue. Over in the UK, evictions have increased by 400%. A 400% increase in evictions. All right, and some parts of the US are not far behind. So wait a minute, let me get this straight. I thought all the money printing during the health crisis was going to solve the problem. You mean it wasn't the long-term solution? You mean it was just a Band-Aid on a broken leg? This didn't stop rents from going up. This didn't stop the wages from being not enough to keep up with the rising cost of living. It didn't stop the out-of-control rising prices everywhere. Well, of course not. Nothing's being done to fix the root of the problem. So this is going to continue to get worse. We're going to see this larger separation between the mega wealthy and the poor, the haves and the have-nots. More control, more power concentrated at the top. More people renting from the big money institutional investors. And they're going to raise those rents on you. Now, I still have people sending me messages, oh, JJ, it's not that bad. These people aren't that mean. They wouldn't raise the rents on people. Open your eyes, people. Look what is happening. Things are not all roses and puppy dogs here, okay? I have a friend that says rainbows and unicorns. It's not all rainbows and unicorns. In fact, it's very little rainbows and unicorns. And this is reality. This is what's happening. As I mentioned at the beginning, the cost of owning property is going up. Just wait until these tax bills start biting here over the next couple years for these inflated property values. Just wait until the next insurance bill comes up for these high home costs and high rebuilding costs that insurance companies have to rake in enough money to be able to rebuild these homes when something happens. Also, we're seeing more extreme weather. The losses of homes that we see year by year continues to increase with the devastating tornadoes, the fires, the floods, you name it. And expect the banks to continue to inflate. Now with the war, they've got the excuse to pump out even more money, endless amounts of money creation, endless amounts of debt, and it's going to continue to keep prices on an upward trend wherever you look. There's more shortages now with what's happening over in Europe, more food shortages, more rising prices there. And I have to tie this in with housing because the cost of food is part of the household budget, and the more you have to pay for food, the less you're going to have to pay for rent, and the harder it's going to be for people to keep a roof over their head. So continue to brace, folks. It's going to continue to get worse. There's nothing being done to solve this. All of the so-called solutions that are being discussed and implemented are just temporary. That's not anything that's going to fix the long-term situation here. So what do? We keep profiting from the madness. There's always a bull market somewhere. Continue to invest. I see investment opportunities in a lot of different stocks that have been beaten down lately. I went out and got some options on an ETF that was beaten down here recently, and we think that's going to pick back up once the money printing goes into high gear. I expect debt globally to skyrocket from here. I wouldn't be surprised if debt doubled over the next 3 to 5 years. That's what it's going to be, inflate, and it's going to be a collapse through inflation. The markets won't collapse, home prices won't collapse, but the average U.S. household budget is going to collapse. That's the collapse. So when people hear me say collapse, they think, oh, the market's going to crash. No, the markets can be propped up to infinity. Again, just a click of a mouse can bring these markets to all-time highs at any moment that they decide, and those are the deciders. All right, so what do you think about these evictions? Should there be some regulations? Should renters have more rights, or should nobody be allowed to own more than one home, or at least no company or corporation? Please let me know. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Peace.